Light. Light is far more important for a good image than most people know, especially when they're first getting started. Having a fantastic camera will only get you as good an image as you have to give it. And by controlling lighting is how we get to those fantastic images that we're used to seeing on television and in the movie theater. So let's take a quick look at some very basic to intermediate lighting techniques in this room, which has a lot of light already, as you can see, but it might not be the light that I want. Welcome to the upstairs bedroom studio. We have a lot of available light in this room, which is a blessing and a curse. So here behind the camera, with the light largely facing me, is a window, serving kind of as a key light, or a position of a key light at any rate. But over here to the side, which would have been kind of a fill light, is another window which is much brighter, because there's a tin roof that is reflecting a lot of light. Now the floor is also light, so the light coming down from the sky is bouncing up and hitting me from below. This is an uncommon angle for light, and that's part of the reason why this image looks a little goofy. To this side is another window, but there's woods over to that side, so it's much darker, as you can see. So this is what we're starting with. Let's see what we can do with it. The first thing we're going to have to do is to start taking control of some of this light. Now, we have used a bunch of towels, which are far from the most ideal thing to use, to knock down the level of light in this room so we can start taking control of it. And I say they're not ideal because they do let light through, and they let light through in whatever color that towel is. So this is why professionals carry around negative fill sheets, they carry around bounce cards, diffusion sheets, stuff like that. They're all different kinds of fabric, basically. That's what it would look like. We're just making do with what we got. What we don't want to do is spend tons of money on situations that we're not really going to be in all that often. So let's see what we can do with it from here, because we've got a couple of our own lights to now start filling this in with a little bit more control. And control is the key when we're talking about light. We're going to look at two lights and a couple of different ways of using them. We've got the Molis G60, which is this little guy here, and the Neewer something. I just call it a pocket light, little pocket LED light on this fancy little stand. We'll look at that later. We're going to use these to fill in the light around here to make this a more pleasing image while maintaining control. Cameras really like good lighting, but once we start messing with it, it's as easy to make things worse as it is to make things better. So how we make things better will mitigate the amount of time we need to deal with how we're making things worse at the same time. You'll see what I mean. Not terrible, is it? It's a little hard on the shadows because it's a very small light, and it's not really diffused very much at all by the little plastic cover on it. So this is acting kind of as a key light. I'm going to move it around a little here to sort of change the shape of the shadows on me. Now, those shadows on my face are important. That's what gives the face depth. We don't want the light to be straight on like that. You know, I feel like I'm in a tool shed. It's a very uncontrolled, unflattering lighting. But just off to the side, I'm going a little bit closer in, so you kind of get a little bit of light on this cheek too. That's not too bad. But it's also, you see the harsh lighting, and now we've got the shadow in the background. Like I said, we're creating problems at the same time we're solving them. So it's pleasing on my face, which is the main thing that we're looking at. I apologize for that. But it's not always great. Especially if I'm moving my hands around, I've got these shadows. There's more we can do. So here we have some highly sophisticated diffusion material called toilet paper. And paper tape, or painter's tape, depending on who you hear it from first, basically. So what we're going to do is take this tape, and we're going to use it to sort of dome this paper over the light to diffuse it a bit more. Doesn't have to be fantastic, it just has to be better. And indeed, that is not fantastic. Let's make this a little smaller. Put it under the... There we go. So that should be enough. Tape it at the top. There. So now, let's take a closer look at that. You can see what I've done with the paper. The key thing about the diffusion material is that there's some distance between it and the light. And that's what gives it these sort of softer shadows than we had before, And now the shadow behind me isn't as noticeable. It's noticeable if I move around and if I point it out. But this is actually much better lighting. Now I might brighten the camera up a little bit. It's a little bit dim because I have it set on manual. Why do I have it set on manual, you might ask? Because the available lighting is going to change every time a cloud passes in front of the sun or the sun comes out from behind the clouds. And that changes the characteristics of the light in the room drastically, even with the towels covering the windows. So I have it on manual so that the lighting characteristics don't change. And that means that when I'm editing and color correcting later on, this is a consistent color palette and light palette to improve upon. But for all that effort, this is not actually the light that I would use in this position. I would use this one. And it'll become readily apparent why here in a moment. Quite a bit brighter, huh? Too bright, of course. I just wanted to show you that for comparison of brightness between these two lights at 100% brightness. Now let's make this usable, because this isn't. Brightness-wise, this is about right. I'm considerably brighter than everything else, and there's still a heck of a significant shadow back there. And if I move this to where I would actually want it, in terms of where it is falling on my face, the shadow becomes even more apparent. Nothing really wrong with shadows, but I really wish it wasn't there. And that's going to be difficult to do in this smallest space. But as you can see, this is a very small diffuser. This is really just the dome that goes over the cone of the light here. There's still more that we can do with this light. The simplest thing to do to diffuse this light is to turn it around and bounce it off of something much larger than putting it through this little silicone cap. You see how there are shadows, but there's no hard lines on those shadows from my hands. And back there, it's still kind of there, but not nearly as noticeable. I would use this in a heartbeat if this is all I had and I didn't have much time to fiddle with it. But there is yet more that we could do. Remember this guy? Let's see what this guy can do with those shadows back there. Turn it on, kind of point it in the direction where the shadows are, and there. Now I'm moving around between the light source and taking a look back there to see how it looks. It's not perfect, but it's better. At least I think so. There's one other thing we have here to play with, and that is another super sophisticated piece of video equipment. A shower curtain. Or a diffusion cloth. The thing about bouncing a light off of something is that it's going to take on the color characteristics of whatever it's bouncing off of. In this case, there's kind of this light bluish, greenish, almost a light sage color. So it's going to pick up some of that color characteristic. And because this light is adjustable, I can kind of account for that color and make it, whatever color temperature I want to bring the skin tone back. But let's try the diffusion cloth and see if that makes any difference. And here we have it. This is a little soft box I've created with a shower curtain, a magic arm, which I think you can sort of see in this shot here, and some features in the room as the room exists. Now, the room exists this way. There's a shelf I'm using, there's some rafters I'm using. What you'll find, the more you need modifiers for lights, the more you need stands to put those modifiers on. For example, if I didn't have this magic arm, this would have been very difficult for me to rig up in such a way that it's off screen. The nice thing about this big soft diffuser like this is that the light seems to wrap around a little. And it doesn't. Light doesn't do that. But because there's a wider surface area of light, which is what the diffuser is doing, making the light come through a much wider surface area, it actually comes from a bunch of different directions. It kind of replicates what happens with the sun in the sky. The sun is a single point, but it's diffused through the atmosphere. And so we get light coming from a variety of different angles when we're not in direct sunlight. And that's kind of what this is trying to replicate to a degree. So here we have the light on a stand. The shower curtain is sort of tinted a bit in order to give you some distance. And that distance is critical for diffusion. You don't want the light right up against the diffusion fabric. You want it further away. That gives it a larger cone, a larger spread. One of the reasons why I really like that G60. There's enough light to push it through this kind of cheap diffusion, the shower curtain, and it still works. Now, is this perfect? No. See how bright it is on this side because I'm really close to it, and it's not really that diffused. I would want this whole thing a little bit further away from me if I could, but I can't get the right angle on it because the wall is right here. And the camera and the light are both right up against the wall. But this is good enough. If I want it to be a little bit dimmer, I would set myself up right about here. You see how this is nice and even, there's no hot spots, and it wraps around a little bit. I actually like this quite a bit. Not bad for a $200 light, $20 shower curtain, probably a $30 piece of hardware, some tape, and some time. Just for comparison, this is what the available light looks like in this room once I've taken all of the towels that were blocking the windows down. Significant difference, huh? I know. There's a very specific little lighting setup in this very specific little place. You're unlikely to run into this exact situation anywhere else. And ultimately, that's what kind of run-and-gun lighting involves, is figuring out what you've got in terms of available light, what you've got in terms of lights you can add, and what you've got in terms of things you can use to modify that light. In my case, having this small assortment of stands and having this couple of these two lights and a couple of extra little bits of hardware, I can usually get what I need out of a given situation. It's never ideal, but it's usually better than what's available. And it doesn't take up that much space. You notice I said that it takes time. And it's not just time setting up a specific lighting setup, although that certainly does take some time to do right. But the more time you spend experimenting with lighting situations and the equipment that you've got, the easier it gets over time to do this sort of thing more quickly. So as usual, give it a try. And what I hope you'll find, which I certainly found, is that even questionable cameras look much, much, much better with more controlled lighting. Lighting is far more important in video than most people think.